So now we're being recorded. I've usually found that not many people will ever watch the recordings, but I can upload them to YouTube, make them available. So if anybody wants to watch a recording, let me know and I'll upload it. I may not just upload them as a matter of course, because YouTube keeps track of how many people actually watch them. And it's usually, I think people say they want a recording to be polite if they're going to miss class. But there are some people who do want to go back. So we'll have it available if we want it. Now I'm going to go into share screen and show you we'll look at some of the slides for a minute, just to raise some questions, and then we'll go back and talk a bit about them. So you should be seeing this slide, which is for AI in Everyday Life, Class 1. I do have a syllabus which lists all of the slides and links to things. And I even created a shorter link to it using something called Bitly if you want to make a record of that or copy that down. You don't have to go to the syllabus, but it's available. This is an overview of the course. We'll be using the Elements of AI course from the University of Helsinki. I like this one because it's not videos, it's text, so we can add our own video and audio. We'll work through many of the exercises in class, and you're more than welcome to try them for yourself, either before or after class. Something you sign up for. Louise was telling me that she has already tried this, and then she was discussing her answers with other people that take the course. So one of the advantages of this course is it links you into other people all around the world who happen to be taking this same course, and you submit your ideas and people respond to them. So you may want to do that. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. It's not like it's a requirement. This is something that you can do. We're also going to try a number of AI programs that are available on the internet. Some of them are really on phones or on tablets. They work on Google Play. So we'll look at some of these things. I think I can get my my Chromebook hooked into this site. I'll have like 2 windows, and we'll do that. And if some of you want to sign on to those and do them in class, you can actually do them rather than me always doing them. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. The links to those will be found in the slides. So we'll have slides when we for each week, and then I'll put the links to the software we're going to try in the slides. I mentioned my son. Here's a website. I clicked his name in, and I found that his net worth and his height and his weight and his kids and so on is all here. So you can look him up if you're interested. Some of you have heard him before. So those are things that we're going to sort of the organization of the class. Does anybody have any questions about that, or any suggestions or any comments about that? Louise, why don't you tell everybody a bit about your experience with the Elements of AI course?
Well, first of all, I thought it was simple to log on and get going, and it was definitely a class that was easy to understand, and it was kind of fun because at the end of each little segment, there were 3 parts to the first segment, and at the end of each one, there was a little test of your knowledge to see if you could think through some of the questions that they had. And then the last questions, as you mentioned, were ones where you actually had to type out an answer, not just choose true or false or A, B, or C. And so I typed out my answers, and then they asked me to peer review other people's answers. So I did that. And while I was doing that, people were looking at my answers. So we were able to go back and forth a little bit at the end of that session. And that was pretty cool. People were reading them probably right after I hit send, and then I was giving them feedback and they were coming back to me. So it was very good.
Yeah,
I
I
only
agree
did
with
the first.
everything Louise said about the first class. The second class, however, gets a lot harder. So I want to warn you, don't expect them to all be that easy. The first class, they sort of, it's easy, and that's how it'll be for us today. The next class, if you go ahead and try to do that, it took me a while to get through that. Don't feel bad if you get into the second class and it's not quite the same. Okay, somebody else was about to say something. Mary, Connor, you're just making a noise in it.
I was not making any noise. I'd be quiet for a change.
You probably banged on your mouse or something and it made your box light up yellow.
I haven't moved. I haven't moved. I'm not the culprit.
Well, something it looked like you were about to talk, but you weren't. Okay, we'll go
I
back.
always look like that.
No, I don't mean it was you. It was like around your box, it lights up yellow. Like if you look at my box, you'll see it's.
I don't have anything. No, your
That's what
box.
led me to think you were about to talk.
Nope.
Nothing, if not, save it, think of something for later. Okay, let me go back to share screen here.
Okay.
I guess we'll go to the same one. And I want to show one more screen. That's not what I meant to do. What I did is I clicked on the image and it went out to the course, which is okay. But what I meant to do was to go down to the next slide. The next slide, I'm going to talk about the Turing test. How many people have heard of the Turing test? Anybody?
Yes, I have.
Okay, it's pretty well known among people in computer circles. The Turing test is named after A.M. Turing. I forget what his first name was, Alan, I think, who was a really brilliant computer scientist who sort of got the theory of a general computer and so on. Also an interesting person politically. He solved a lot of Nazi codes during World War II. Then he was persecuted by the British for his sexuality, for being gay. And so he's had an interesting life. This is just one article he wrote called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And he said, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? Okay. What do people think? Can machines think? This should begin, this is just the beginning of his article. You can read the whole article, it's readily available. You might begin with a definition of think and machine. And then you would get into a long discussion. What does it mean to think? I believe George is a psychologist, right? You're the expert on that. How would you define think?
There are many ways, Ted. One is the oddity question. They've tried to get chimpanzees that can learn other skills to master the oddity question, and they often can't. The oddity question is, you have 3 items and 2 are triangles, 1's a square. And then the second question is, there are 2 circles and then a triangle. And then the third one is neither one of the other 2, but it's a deviation from the other 2. So it's an odd kind of situation. I don't know if people could follow that.
Well, if you can answer that, you would say you were thinking, right?
Yeah, I think so. There are many definitions. Yeah.
You wouldn't say that somebody couldn't answer it wasn't thinking necessarily. Like me, I probably couldn't answer it. But like I believe my cat thinks, and I'm pretty sure he can't solve that problem. So there's different levels of thinking.
That's right.
Suppose I were to say, what is the square root of 597? And somebody answered me immediately.
Yeah.
Now I would say that that was not unaided human intelligence, right? And if you
Yeah.
have a hand calculator there, you could push it in and push the button.
Yeah.
So you
Well,
could say
and
the hand calculator is smarter than us, right? It can answer that question.
Yeah, that
And-
there's another distinction in thinking between convergent and divergent thinking. So like on IQ tests, one of the questions is, what's the capital of France? The answer is Paris, and that's only one answer. And the same thing with the square root of 500, whatever you said. It's convergent. There's only one answer.
Mhm.
Then there's divergent thinking. For example, how many uses can you think of for a brick?
Mhm.
And it's oftentimes used as a measure of creativity, but that's one thing that probably animals couldn't do. Convergent
Of
and
course, they're
divergent.
using the term intelligence, which is somewhat different from thinking, I think. At least as it's defined practically.
Yeah,
But there's all controversy about that. And then there are multiple intelligences. Now you
That's
look
right.
at that face there. Who is that? If you'd seen him before, you would be able to recognize him. Being able to recognize a face is not part of intelligence as we normally measure it. Probably because babies, by the time they're a year old, they know how to do that. Probably all humans are good at that, except for people who've had a stroke that damaged certain parts of their brain or something. How do we do that? I think it's not really very well known how we do it. And how do you train for a computer? That is not an easy task. It's a very difficult task. It may be a difficult task for people too, in the sense that it takes a long time to learn. Because I believe something like a third of our brain is devoted to visual image processing, which we don't normally think of as intelligence. But it's part of thinking. And it's certainly part of artificial intelligence and getting a computer to be able to recognize faces. And we'll learn how it does that. Whether that's the same way we do it or not is a whole nother question. And that's one reason that this is an interesting course, is that if we're able to train a computer to do something, that may give us some idea of how humans do it. Maybe not. Maybe the computer will do it in a different way. Maybe not the same way. But we try to take hints from the brain in developing the computer. Okay, so getting back to the Turing test, what Turing said, it's a waste of time to try to define think. We'll have all kinds of definitions. We'd have to do a survey. Instead of it, he thought of another closely related question, which I guess is on the next slide, if I put it on the next slide. He wants to have a test based on a game. Now, this was a game called the imitation game. Apparently, people played these kind of parlor games a lot. This was in 1950 that he wrote this. And I was alive in 1950, but I was 8 years old. I never played this game. But the way this game worked, you had three people, a man, a woman, and an interrogator. And the man and the woman were in another room. And people would send them messages on paper, so you didn't see them or hear them. And they would have a question, and people would answer the question. And the object of the game was to say which is the man and which is the woman. That's kind of a sexist game in a sense, because you're assuming that men and women have different mentalities, because you're basing this totally on their speech. But that's what the game was. So you would ask a question, and you try to ask a question that the computer, that a man would be able to answer, but a woman wouldn't, or that a woman would be able to answer and a man wouldn't, or that they would answer differently, such as, will X please tell me the length of his or her hair? Okay, now suppose the answer is, my hair is shingled and the longest strands are about 9 inches long. Now we might say that that was a woman, because men probably don't know what it means to have your hair shingled. I've heard of shingles, but I never heard of having your hair shingled. When I hear it, I can understand what it probably means, but I probably wouldn't answer that. I would just answer. Now, if you're going to go by, if I said my hair was 12 inches, I'm a woman. If it's 2 inches, I'm a man. I'm not sure if you had to answer honestly in this game. This is the game. Okay, now what Turing wasn't interested in distinguishing between men and women. He was saying, let's apply this to distinguishing between a computer and a person and see if a computer can masquerade as a human. And that was the challenge. And he said, he thought within 50 years, a computer would be able to pass as a human. You could chat with it and you wouldn't know whether it was a human you were talking to or a computer. That is the Turing test. Now that is that thinking? One could raise a question. He thought if a computer could do that, everybody would agree that it was thinking. Today, computers are pretty close. Not quite there, but pretty close. It's still questionable whether they're really thinking. It depends on what you mean by thinking. The way they do it is they parrot what people have said to similar questions, and they have a huge database of that. Maybe that's a little bit about how babies learn to talk. They answer the same way other people have answered the same question. But we think that people have more general abstract ideas they use to formulate answers, and that's what we mean as thinking. So we could raise a question, even if they do that, are they thinking? But certainly it was an interesting empirical challenge. And a lot of people have written computer programs to try to pass for that, to try to achieve it. In fact, there's a contest. I'm not sure if it's still going on. It went on for a number of years with a number of computer programs competing, trying to see if they could fool judges into thinking that they were really a person. It partly depends on who the judge is. If the judge is sophisticated in computers programming, they would probably know how to ask questions that would be harder than just a common ordinary person who's at a dinner party that doesn't have any training or expertise in this area. So this is the Turing test that was formulated back in 1950, and that people have been working on ever since. He was saying, well, computers will have a certain amount of computer power by 1950. That'll be enough to do it, and they will have passed this. Today, we have more computer power than he estimated, more memory, faster computers. We haven't quite made it. Now let's look at some of the software. This is a program called ELIZA. ELIZA is the first, really, of the chatbots. As far as I know, it's the first. This is also 1950, created by a guy named Joseph Weizenbaum, who you can see there. And he was trying to make a computer that could communicate with humans in natural language. Now, generally speaking, computers didn't do that, certainly at his time. Computers went to sometimes they're programmed by actually going into the electronics and programming the switches. Later, they got more languages that were closer to natural language. We had the first computer program I learned, the Fortran, as formula translating program, tried to allow you to write a program in something similar to the language that a mathematician would write in writing it, where you can write a formula and it translates into what's called a machine language. So you have the higher level languages, the lower level languages. but we didn't have computers that you could just talk to. Weizenbaum decided to write one as a technical challenge. He wanted to have a program that would do the basically the Turing challenge, where you would type something in, it would answer you, and it would try to conduct a conversation. Now, what would this conversation be about? What are you going to train it to talk about? He decided that he would train it to be a psychotherapist of a particular type, based on the psychotherapy of a guy named Carl Rogers, or Gerian therapy. Probably, I know George is not a clinician, I don't think, but I'm sure he knows of this. Other people may know it. It's in the category of humanistic psychology rather than, say, Freudian psychology or something, where you try to mirror back what the client says and get the client to find the answers to their own problems by giving them support, giving them encouragement, but not throwing in many of your own ideas. That's the basic idea. Maybe I've oversimplified that, but that was what he was looking for. The reason he picked that is that such a therapist doesn't really have to know much. They only respond to what the client says. They don't have to throw in their own ideas. They don't have to answer difficult questions. So it's a lot simpler than the Turing test. It's a lot simpler than the idea of being able to talk about anything. Like you're supposed to talk to Eliza as if you were here to be for therapy. It's got a topic. It's not a general domain chat box, which will talk about anything. Today we have those. 1950 we didn't, and we'll look at one of those later in this class. But I want to look at Eliza. Now, Eliza has a fairly simple computer program. This is the first one that I worked on with my son back when he was, maybe 10, I guess. Back in the 1960s, we had this running on a Commodore 64. You didn't have to put it on a supercomputer or it wasn't hooked into the internet. I don't think we really had the internet as such then. It was a very simple little package. You can go in and change the program. Weizenbaum published the whole script for the program in his article. I had it in BASIC on the Commodore 64, but you don't have to do that. Back in those days, when you got a personal computer, it always came expecting you to be able to write your own programs. Today, people don't really do that anymore much, I don't think, but because you get apps to do everything. So you go into Eliza, and Eliza answers you. Now, why don't we give this a try? This is something you see here. It says, see Eliza here, or if you actually, in most of my slides, if you click on the image, it also goes to the software, but this is going to the wrong, didn't do that, did it? It went to the next slide. So let's click on try Eliza here. Here is a website. This is a very Rogerian psychotherapist chatbot. Hello, I am Eliza. I'll be your therapist today. Now, what should I say? If one of you wants to open this and share screens, I'd be glad to have somebody else do this too.
Ed, why don't you try something really challenging, like I'm thinking of committing suicide.
Okay. Doesn't seem to be. Do you believe it is normal? to be thinking of committing suicide. Okay, now what has it done? It has
Weird.
taken something from my sentence and repeated it. That's part of making it seem like it's carrying on a conversation, right? And that's what ELIZA does. If you look at the software, when you submit a sentence, it scans through that sentence. If it sees the words I am thinking of, then it takes what was next and it parrots that back in one of 5 or 6 different ways. It doesn't give the same exact answer every time. On the other hand, it's not an answer that you would think a real therapist would give, right? Obviously, it's not persuasive. What else can we say? I would say
A real therapist would say, how do you feel about that?
how do you feel about that? Or how can I help you? Or what's happened that makes you feel that way? I'm not a therapist, but just any person would respond in a more empathetic way, I would think.
So what
Eliza
if you
might,
turn it around and ask Eliza a question? Like ask if she thinks it's normal to be thinking about
Oh,
suicide.
I think it is sick. Why not? Okay. Defending you, not me. It pretty much says that whenever you ask it anything about it. So now suppose I say, okay. Now you can try to mess it up by asking that, or you could throw out general questions of the sort of questions that aren't about therapy, like let's see, how is the do you like the warm weather today? Talk about the weather. We were discussing you like me. Okay. Now there's some of the transcripts he shows of conversations that look better than this, but I usually get pretty bad results right off. And looking at ELIZA, a very Rogerian basic psychotherapist chat box. I'm sure Carl Rogers would not respond the way this is responding. Anybody have anything else you'd like to tell it before we go on?
I have one question back actually to the philosophy or idea of can machines think and what is learning. I've always been under the impression personally that you learn from error, you learn from mistakes, you learn from previous experience. And to me, when I try to apply that to AI, I have trouble. That unless I'm very naive, I don't know that computers actually will take what they have. Maybe they do now, but would be able to take the data and formulate another decision. And
the programs you have today do learn from their experiences and learn from their interactions.
Okay.
They don't just, the early computers like ELIZA just followed what the programmer told them to do.
Okay.
That's what we call good old-fashioned AI. You write down a list of instructions and it follows the instructions. So that wasn't learning, but the techniques we have today do scan through lots of data and learn from it and improve over time. That is one of the criteria that we look for in talking about artificial intelligence, is that it gets better over time.
On its
Eliza
own.
does not. Eliza will, unless you write another script. You can write another script and then it'll be different.
Mhm.
And people have
Understand.
written a lot of scripts. There's actually a script for the where Eliza is a psychotic patient rather than the therapist. And you know, so you could write a different script for a different kind of personality for Eliza, but you can't get Eliza to. Eliza doesn't learn from what people say. Now, how would it learn? It would learn because what did other people say? And what were the answers and how did they respond? And it picks up from that. And maybe that's something of how humans learn.
Mhm. Okay.
Anybody else have any comments? Okay, let's look then at a little more modern program here. This is probably the best of contemporary chatbots. There is one that Google has claimed to have one that's better than this one, but they haven't made it available to the general public to see. So we can't be sure how good it really is. This is one called, here it's called Kooky. Sometimes it's got another name. This is a general purpose chatbot. And I gave you a link to this on the slides. But I reopened my account in order to start at the beginning. It remembers your past conversation. Once you have an account, you have a continuing conversation with it. It starts out with, "Hi there, I'm Kooky." Trying to hang up. I'm getting phones on my call on my phone here on my watch. I'm like, who's the guy who had a watch? Some
It's
cartoon.
kooky.
Yeah, okay. But my watch was calling me. That's not Kooky. "Hi there, I'm Kooky. I'm a friendly AI here to chat with you 24/7. We could start by getting to know each other if you like. What is your name?" All right, so it asked me a question. I should probably just take it straightforwardly. My name is Ted.
Yeah,
Tina eats ducks. So what is that?
TED.
Those- My initials, TED?
No, it's, yeah,
No,
TED,
it's
yeah.
Tina.
It's using Tango S Whiskey Foxtrot.
Must be what?
It's using, phonetic, like Tango, Echo, the military language.
Oh,
They
I see.
make
Yes,
sure,
yes,
they
that's
make
right.
sure they got it right.
I see. I could try something like, what would Kooky be? This kind of language. You type nonsense into me, so I assume. I don't know how it's doing. Try to commit suicide thing. Remember, this is not a therapist, but you might tell anybody that. Well, that's a pretty good answer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, not bad.
I'm sure it anticipated that people might say that, right? It's like on, if you say, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck? And then on the iPhone, it's already anticipated that it has an answer. So that's not bad.
He could have given the suicide prevention hotline.
Oh. That's a number, but it's not a telephone number, is it? Okay.
He's acting like a
Well,
real therapist.
What do you think about that?
Well, so an interesting experiment might be that you tell Cookie the suicide prevention number, and then a little later pose your same question. I'm thinking of committing suicide, and see if Cookie gives you back that number.
That's good.
I mean, I should tell her the number
Mhm.
and then see what she does. Well, we could try that. We could go into
Yeah, well,
suicide
doing is
prevention
building
hotline to get a number.
yeah, what we're doing is building Cookie's database and see how efficiently she uses it.
There it is.
Okay, now I gotta get back to, this thing comes up here. There's Cookie. There we go. I could tell you a joke to cheer you up. I would like to hear a joke. Do anybody want to hear a joke?
Yeah.
Is that a joke?
Yeah, people who are into binary coding will get that right away.
Yeah, what is it?
No, that was a joke.
What?
That's the joke.
I was joking.
Okay. Computers think it's a funny joke. I'm happy here. She doesn't pretend to be a real person, so that's pretty good.
Can we ask Cookie the direct question now? What's the suicide prevention hotline number?
Now, is that the same number that I gave her, or is that just a different number?
Same number,
It's the same
same
number.
number.
That doesn't necessarily mean that she got it from me, but she may have, we both got it from the same source. Well, that's a pretty good answer, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would say yes, and it's supporting that she got it from you would be that earlier you kind of skirted around the question and she did not offer that number. So that is kind of supportive.
You could ask her if she got that from you.
Yeah, I agree.
So I didn't give her all this other information that she had here about the 160 crisis centers.
Do we know whether Cookie is obligated to give honest answers?
Huh.
Not necessarily. I mean, she never said she was. I don't have to do anything I don't want to, okay? Anybody have anything else they want to try with Cookie?
Ask her how she feels about something.
Ted, is she the forerunner of Alexa?
I don't, Alexa is just one company. I don't think so. No. Alexa
Okay.
is not really designed to be a general purpose chatbot. Alexa is
Okay.
designed to be an assistant. It's designed to
Okay.
serve you and to meet your needs. And people are not always happy with it for that. But it's just, you know, it's supposed to enable you to get information you want, or to get say you want to play a certain song, it's supposed to find that song and play it. This is designed to social conversation.
Okay.
And it goes into
Okay.
this is the one that went into the Turing test contest and won the contest 3 years in a row. Although
Wow.
more than 3 years, but it improved. It's not like it won with the same exact version. I mean, they keep improving it.
Okay. Thank you. It's
Now that raises
fascinating.
a question: do we want such a chatbot? It was a test for Turing. I mean, it's an interesting technical challenge, certainly, to create. Is there a need for it? Is there a desire to have it?
Well, see, Ted, it kind of worries me if we let robots do our thinking, what's going to happen to us and our thinking?
If we are getting answers to our questions, really, I mean, it depends. If you want to know Suppose you're thinking of committing suicide, as we started with. If it's giving you the answer, the suicide hotline, that's not bad, right? But you're going to talk to a
That's-
human there. If you want
Yeah,
to do
that's
therapy with the computer itself, it's not really very helpful. It doesn't
Yeah.
pretend to be. There are other computers that do. We'll look at that really do therapy, and many people find helpful.
Okay, we were talking at lunch today, and I guess out in California, they're using these robots as waitresses and waiters and bartenders and
I think that's a very relevant question. In general, you know, as we automate, do we lose capabilities to do things that we really ought to be able to do? My grandkids would rather use a calculator than a pencil and paper.
I know, and that's not working their brain, and it kind of worries me.
And I would too, but I think you still need that capability.
Well, I was involved at the Unitarian Church. We were listing a job opening for a secretary or office manager. And one of the things they put in should be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now, I thought we shouldn't put that in a job listing. First of all, because it's too elementary school. And second, you don't do that on the job. Do you need somebody who can do long division? Yeah. When did we last do long division? Suppose you wanted to find the square root of 537 or something. Do you know how to do that on a paper with paper and pencil? I don't. I learned that once, but I've forgotten. Now, does that mean that I've lost something or not? That's an interesting question.
I'll tell you how far back I push it. I still occasionally use my slide rule.
Yay.
I know how to use a slide rule.
And each time I do it, I say, boy, aren't calculators great?
But I would rather trust a nurse or a physician. I'm in healthcare. I was retired from healthcare, using a calculator to calculate my IV drips or my infinitesimal medication dosages. I'd rather that they use a calculator than try to remember how to actually do all that math, particularly under the stress of whatever's happening in the environment. I remember when they started allowing calculators on SATs and ACTs, and the hue and cry among the faculty as to whether that was appropriate or not. It was an interesting discussion. It seems like we're still having.
What did they conclude? Do they allow them or not?
It was pretty split. Because I think that it was made by the higher ups, the SAT and ACT, and we depended on it so much for admissions that, we went along with it. And we were using it in the clinical settings anyway, so we allowed it on tests. So, and that would have been, I have no idea, 70s, 80s, when that started happening.
Yeah. Ted, one conflict in the world of business and the interaction with machines is the interest that companies have in reducing their employees' costs and personnel costs in an effort to automate. So like on our internet service provider, like Suddenlink, they'll have a chat. So if you call their help desk, you get put right in a chat. And they do some Rogerian therapy and they say, well, I'm sorry you're having problems. But then they always have a stock answer. And most of the time people want, and this is the competing interest, people want to talk to a real person because they want context. They want to describe what's happening in their individual situation. And I think that's a conflict that businesses have with their own customers. And the businesses often opt to maximize the amount of service they provide with chat boxes and computers and minimize the amount of people contact, and their customers want the latter.
Do they really? Or do they always? It may depend on what the customer's need is. Like if you're calling a place and you have a specific question and you want an answer, if it gives you the answer, you'd be satisfied.
I just had a terrible experience with Shutterfly and Groovebook and trying to get communication going. And it couldn't just be answered with an email. It took 10 times longer to go back and forth in the emails and the texting than it would be just to pick up the phone and talk to each other. I ended up with somebody in Guatemala. I couldn't understand him. He couldn't understand me. It was awful. And I don't like the way that we're communicating now to solve problems using texts and emails. I just don't like it. I like to talk.
Okay, that's one thing that we like, talking to people. And I think that's why we take a class and we talk, and that's part of human nature, that we enjoy socializing and talking to people. So that's
And I
one
think
thing
that's
that
very
we're
important.
losing. Whether we're
The
getting
purpose of
a
the
solution
the
is another
purpose
thing.
the purpose of these decision trees when you make a phone call is to move the cost of dealing with consumer problems from the company back to the consumer themselves, where their time and effort goes into solving these problems, and it saves the companies money. So the effort is just entirely financial, and it's to our detriment, us being the consumers. But that's the main reason. But to Ted's point, sometimes it is easy. If it's a simple question, it is easy, but that's, to me, the exception rather than the rule.
Well, let me give you a specific example. This is one that a friend of my son's has worked on. They just sold their software. He's a young guy, about 30 something. He now got $5 million for it. He sold it to McDonald's. Now, this is software. When you pull up to the drive-in window, somebody says, "May I have your order, please?" or whatever, and you give them your order. Now, then there'll be questions like, do you want fries with that? Do you want it to be a total meal with a drink and fries? Or maybe you say, I want a Whopper, but I don't want the sauce. You're engaging in a conversation. Now, you're engaging in a conversation. You don't see the person. You hear a person's voice, but you're talking to a microphone, and you're hearing a speaker. And what do you want? It seems like what you want is for somebody to answer quickly and to take your order and get it correct and turn it in. You don't want them to say, "What do you think about the horrible thing the Russians are doing in the Ukraine?" Or, you don't want social conversation in that particular setting. Now, maybe if you were in the restaurant and you were up at the counter and there was nobody in line, maybe you'd have a social conversation. Maybe if you think the clerk is attractive and you're looking for a date, you try to chat them up or something. But if you're at the drive-in window, now McDonald's is hoping to get to where computers do that, and they don't have to pay people to do that job. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Would we be unhappy or would we know?
Well, I went to
Well,
one
I think
of those.
you have touched on, is it intrinsically good or intrinsically bad? And I think the answer is depends. When I call somebody on the telephone, would I really like to go back 100 years ago, turn the crank and go through Central and wait for somebody to answer and connect me? Or do I like connecting really quickly? I think I like connecting really quickly. On the other hand, there are times when I like interacting with people.
My grandmother used to have that kind of a phone. It was a party line. And the way it worked, there were 12 people on this road, and each of them had a code. So if the phone rang 2 longs and a short, it was for Mary. 2 shorts and a long, it was for Joe. And everybody along the street knew who was getting a call, and they would all pick up the phone and listen. Now that was a real neighborhood.
but-
Everybody knew what everybody was doing. You heard everybody.
Well, that
And one
may have
day
been
they
your
came in and they
grandmother.
installed a dial phone. They went directly from that. They didn't go to number please, which is what I had as a kid, where you pick up the phone. And now having a woman who says number please and you give her your number, in my opinion, is not better than putting the number in the keyboard. You know, I don't feel that I'm getting any human warmth or interaction or anything. And if we had that, we would not be able to every single woman in America would have to be a telephone operator to cover the number of calls we have. I mean, it's simply not, you know, so you don't have to say that having a dial phone where you could, we had dial, or then you have actually push button, and putting in your number, or with my iPhone, I can tell it who I want to call Linda at home, and I can do that in the car. I don't feel that I've lost anything of human contact there. I don't know that I care too much about the human contact when I go to Wendy's and I want to order a Whopper. If it asked me the right question and responded accurately.
Well, Ted, to that exact point on your McDonald's example that you had, you know, that in that particular situation, both the restaurant, whether it's a computer or a person, and the customer have expectations already in place. They already know, hey, I didn't come up here to talk to you about, you know, committing suicide. I came here to get a hamburger and fries. And that expectation is already linked in. So that particular interaction is, you know, an exception where that might be possible. But in general, when you call customer service and you have a problem with your dishwasher or whatever it is, there are not necessarily expectations put in place. And so that's going to be a much more difficult computer program. So, you know, the answer is it depends. I mean, clearly that's correct. It does depend, and some of these things can be handled. But that McDonald's one is sort of a fairly simplistic example where everybody's expectations are already foreshadowed, and it makes that program basically friendly. Whereas most of the time, that's not the case.
Or how much of the time is it the case, actually, when you go through your daily life? I have a feeling it's not that uncommon that you have
Ted,
that kind of interaction, right?
I think a lot of the problem has to do with educating people. I mean, we went to a McDonald's and the guy was behind the counter. So we stepped up. He didn't look at us, never did look at us. And we got looking around, and 10 feet away was a kiosk that we were supposed to order. Well, we didn't know that. We were from out of town. We'd never seen that before. And then we started pushing, you know, tapping the screen and trying to order. We were so frustrated. The guy came out and finally said, okay, just do this and this and this. I think they assume that everybody knows how to do all these things. And just like the roundabouts in driving, nobody taught us how to do it. They just said, here it is, do or die.
Is this a generational thing that young people today are more likely to expect they're going to have a terminal and they're going to punch in numbers and so on? I mean, this is something that people learn. I know teaching, for several years, I had to teach my students how to use the computer to to get on and do basic stuff that they had to do, because that's how we did data analysis. And they certainly didn't want to do it by hand. If you want to do cross tabulations and you want to do correlations, you're much happier having a computer do it. But I would say after 4 or 5 years, people came out of high school familiar with the idea of using a computer interface, and you know, you didn't have to teach them a lot of basic stuff. So it's partly, and of
But
course,
see,
new
I
stuff
don't
comes along.
Yeah, and I don't have anybody to ask. My walls at my house don't know, my friends don't know the answers, and it's just really hard.
So
I
you gotta
think
have a
educating
grandson
us-
or a
I
younger
don't.
family member around to teach you how to do
Yeah,
things.
Well,
Yeah.
And see, I don't, and that's the frustrating part. And my IT person, like I said before, he said, Betty, you can't fix stupid. I said, I'm not stupid. I just have to
yeah.
be taught.
Like what
Yeah,
if you're
and to
checking
your
in at
point-
an airline, they have a terminal and you put it in, push the buttons and you get the thing to put around your suitcase so you can check your suitcase in, you get the boarding pass. You know, I go to the
Yeah.
airline, I want to get checked in for my flight, I want to get my boarding pass, I want to get my suitcase checked. Probably if they have 20 terminals there, I'm going to get it done quicker and easier than if I have to wait in line. Now, if I could get to a person just as quickly, I'd probably prefer that. You know,
Yes.
But when you want to get to a person, if you have to wait 30 minutes in line to get to a person, then you're happy to have the terminal do it, I guess.
Yeah. I guess I'm just in favor of teaching people. You know, they used to have service, you know, teachable moments on TV on how to do this, how to do that. And I appreciated that. But now people just assume everybody knows everything and you better not make a mistake or you won't get on your plane or you won't get your hamburger.
I don't know. I was at the airline. They had somebody standing around to help you with the machines. So I don't know. Some airlines do,
haven't
and some don't maybe, but
Yeah, it's just difficult for people like me.
how about
I
the
wonder if we
computer
kind
checkout
of
at the
strayed far away
supermarket?
from.
Go ahead, Art.
I wonder if we've kind of strayed far away from the topic of the course.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
a little bit. This is sort of introductory, and we're getting to what our
Well,
demands are.
No, I understand because here we are, to your point. My wife and I both have postgraduate degrees. Mine is technical degree. But when we get in trouble with our phones, we hand them to our teenage granddaughters. They straighten things out.
And you're lucky to have them there.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Whether people want to chat with Kooky or not is a question. Do you enjoy doing that? Would you go back? Is it something that you would find? Some people seem to do that. Now there is, I don't think I'm gonna do Wobot today, but later in the course we'll do a real therapy program that is designed to offer people help and has been shown to be successful in some cases. It's much more directive. It's not open conversation. What it does is it tells you what to do and gives you very directed questions. But we'll
But
get
you
to
can
that
ask,
another time. Yeah.
I was going to say, I ask my phone 100 times a day how to do things and what to do. It's not that difficult. I mean, I
And
don't
you
need,
get answers you can use.
yes. I mean, I don't understand why that Eliza and Cookie, I understand what they're doing, but if you've got that in your hand and you use it and you can get people, you're directed to people, and I don't understand the frustration. I use it 1,000,000 times a day if I don't know anything.
You do voice or you can say
Yes.
your phone?
No, I usually type it in my phone. And if I can't, then I'll go to voice, but that's just the way I do it.
So this may be a learning curve, and as you get used to it and you do more of it and you get better at it, you will use more of it. So partly we're talking about a transition, a generational thing as people get used to it.
Right.
If we're talking about psychotherapy, it's not so clear that doing psychotherapy with your phone will ever really
No,
be
I
satisfactory.
agree. Even though I have
Well,
done some
maybe
sessions
it
like
will
that
be.
recently because of
Maybe it will.
COVID. I have done some sessions like that recently because of COVID. On my
Well,
phone.
you know, but you're talking to a human. You're not talking
Right.
to a
Right.
computer, right? I mean,
Right.
talking to a human on the computer is still, you're still interacting with a human therapist.
Right.
Yeah. Why don't we look at some of the some of the material in the course, in the Helsinki course, and try some of those exercises. Getting back to more of the material in the course we're asked to do. Let's see if I can find where that is. Okay, let's try the questions here. Okay, going through some of the points that it's trying to make. We should talk about a pinch of AI, not an AI. An AI, an artificial intelligence, not a machine. It's a matter of degree. And machines, different machines will have different levels of it. Now, one of the things that it's talking about is, say, a self-driving car. There is no official definition of AI, but what we're talking about is, let's go back to the beginning of this and go through this exercise. It starts out with some examples. Self-driving car. Is a self-driving car? I would think that's a matter of degree. I have an Outback. It has adaptive cruise control, which I think is great. You know, you put on cruise control, it will follow people. If the person ahead of you slows down, it slows down. If the person speeds up, it speeds up to the point that you set. And if I drive out of the lane, it will steer me back in. Now, my wife's got a better car. Hers will stay in the middle of the lane. You can take your hand off the wheel and it drives right down the middle of the road. But it beeps at you, and after a while it says, put your hand back on the wheel. But eventually you'll get a car that's totally self-driving. They really don't have that today, but some of the companies are pretty close. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? How do people feel about self-driving cars? Would you like to be able to get in a car and punch in your destination and sit back and read a magazine or something? Seems like a good idea to me. I don't feel.
I like it, except I don't want the other driver or the other car to be self-driving. If that makes any sense.
Well, it's because you don't trust it to be safe.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, my
Well,
view is probably someday, but not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
it seems likely that it could be safer than humans driving. Humans driving are not 100%
not safe.
safe, as we all know. The promise of self-driving cars is that they would be safer than regular cars, than human-driven cars. If that was the case, I think most people would feel that that was desirable.
Is it any different than flying?
Different than what?
Well,
Flying.
how about
Flying.
if you have an automatic pilot in an airplane? That's
Yeah,
similar.
I mean, we fly all the time. I mean, I'm sure that predates me, but I'm sure that people were skeptical, and now we all fly everywhere. Don't think two things about it. Isn't that kind of the same technology?
Well, but that's a human pilot. It's not a computer flying the plane.
No, that's
Probably.
true, but it's dependent on radar. It's dependent on all kinds of technologies that the
Is
So that
anybody
raises
here?
a question, an interesting question of how we appraise risks, like how dangerous something is. When I was young, they used to have machines in the airports where you would buy an insurance policy for the flight in case you died on the flight.
That's right.
And people like married couples with children would not fly together because they felt that if the plane fly, they wanted one parent to survive. So they would take different flights. And with time, we learned that the risk is small. The risk of plane crash is small enough that we're willing to take that risk. And if you need life insurance, you need it all the time. You don't just need it for the short time that you're on the airplane. You need it while you're driving home from the airport too.
you probably need it more.
You should get a general life. They don't do that anymore. They don't offer life insurance just for the flight. That was to reassure people. Well, that's true with a lot of things. Like when I remember when AIDS first came out, I had a friend who was frightened to death, and he was single. He'd had sex with a woman who was a psychologist, 45 years. He was sure he was going to die because he'd had one sexual contact and so on. And they sort of scared you with it, you know, intentionally. And later you learn that the risk is lower. If you're gay and you're having gay sex, it's higher. You know, you have to appraise risks in life. But
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to the cars. Maybe it's an example of AI learning. And I don't know much about them, but can they, for instance, anticipate a deer running in front of you? Whereas, you know, a person I would think would have a better reaction, a faster reaction, or to a changing weather condition, or, you know, I simply don't know if that's something that
My car puts the windshield wipers on. I mean, it senses that.
it senses the rain. But I'm talking about an immediate change where, you know, you have to be able to react. And that's one of the problems of aging is, you know I don't react to the deer that's going to jump in front of my car as fast now as maybe I did 10 years ago.
I have a friend who's fairly sophisticated on those kinds of topics. And he was talking about self-driving cars. And number one issue is that the car will always go the speed limit. And if it's 25, it's 25, and almost humans, everybody goes 30.
Everybody.
Because in a 25 zone, because that's just, the cops won't. And the second thing is that that self-driving cars will be identifiable, and there will be people, let's say you're going into a rotary like we were talking about before, and they'll see a self-driving car is about to enter the rotary, and they won't, and coming from the left, and they should yield, but they won't because they know the self-driving car will stop to avoid an accident just for what you say, that so they'll intentionally or deliberately violate the driving rules because they know the self-driving car will not. And that was a couple of issues that he was just throwing out in a conversation we had about that topic.
Okay, how about we look at the content recommendation? That's something that we all see with AI. When you go to a website and you shop for something, you will get recommendations for other things based on your history, based on what you're looking for, and also based on what other people who shop for a certain thing also shop for. Is this a good or a bad thing? Some people say that they don't want that. They want to use DuckDuckGo as their search engine instead of Google because it won't share your information. Others would say that it's helpful. Personally, I find it useful enough to have ads pop up for things that I'd looked for before. I don't find it troublesome.
Yeah, so what's the problem? People don't like to be interrupted or what?
It's partly the privacy. People are concerned about there are organizations and people who are very concerned about their privacy, and they don't want it to be known. Now, maybe if you're looking for a prostitute or something, you don't want others recommended. You want to do certain topics that you'd be embarrassed by. Usually when I shop for things, it's, I wouldn't care if people knew I was shopping for it. Other than that, I'm not sure what the problem would be. Facial recognition, technically a difficult problem, but one that is getting much better. And people are passing laws against that and prohibiting it as used by police departments. When you come into the United States at customs, they take a picture of you. You go to a kiosk and you put your passport in, and it checks your face as the computer is seeing it against the passport, and I suppose also feeds into a database of criminals, people they may be looking for, or whatever. China is bigger on this than we are. China has no concern for people's privacy, and they keep track of where everybody is. So this is something that will become possible because of artificial intelligence, that we'll be able to keep track of where everybody is by having cameras everywhere and photographing everybody and run it through a computer and say, yeah, I saw you were over in Parkersburg over at the Chinese restaurant or something. They can find that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we try to control it? It raises a social issue as to how it's used. Now, yesterday there was a mentally disturbed man who was shooting homeless people on the street in New York and Philadelphia. And they came up with a picture of him. Whether they found him through facial recognition, I don't know that they did, but they have 3 pictures of him that were picked up by security cameras. He sort of had a hat on and you couldn't see his whole face. But you can use that sort of information. Maybe you can pick up somebody like that. That's certainly a plus. Okay, now here's a graphic that shows some of the terms that we're going to be using. And
You're not on screen share?
am I not on screen share?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. I guess it doesn't matter. Let me put this up. I didn't, when I see my screen, it's the same whether I'm on screen share or not. So I guess it's confusing. You see that graphic? That's from our assignment. Does that come up to your screen now?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Some of these terms sort of mean what you think they might mean. Like pattern recognition. I think, as far as I know, pattern recognition is pretty much means what it means to everyday life. Machine learning, I would say, doesn't. Machine learning essentially means statistics, and it doesn't sound like that's what it means. What does deep learning mean? Now, in the generally gut feeling of what something means, deep learning would mean I'm learning the profound underpinnings of it. It's sort of Hegelian or it's Kantian. You know, you're not just learning superficial facts, you're learning profound facts. What deep learning means in AI is that you have a neural network with several layers, and that it goes from one layer to another, to another, to another, which has nothing to do with being deep in the common sense way. So we have to look at some of these terms, and we're going to have to learn what they mean, and that's part of what we'll be doing. The distinction between general AI and narrow AI, that's one that we touched on today. Narrow AI is AI that's designed to do a specific thing. And general AI is trying to make something that can learn new things, that can do different things, that can respond to new questions. Now, in the history of artificial intelligence, we started out thinking that it was going to be general. And that turned out to be much harder than people anticipated. People were very optimistic about what was going to be done. And in 10 years, a computer will be smarter than a human and writing poems and solving math problems. Narrow AI is trying to solve a particular issue. And more progress was made with doing something like that. Now, maybe that's more like what we were talking about ordering at McDonald's, an AI that can take your order at McDonald's and ask you the right questions, understand what you're saying. That's partly voice recognition, all of that goes in. It's harder than you might think, but that's something that's useful. General AI would be able to also answer broader questions. what you find with narrow AI is that you come up against limits and it has to get broader. Like translation is narrow, translating from one language to another is a difficult question, and more difficult than you might think, because you can't just translate words for word. Languages are different. Like suppose I would just say the animal didn't cross the road because it was tired. Or suppose I say the animal didn't cross the road because it was wide. What does the word it refer to in those sentences? The animal didn't cross the road because it was tired. I think it's clear it is the animal, right? The animal got tired. The animal didn't cross the road because it was wide. The wide is the road. How do we know that? We know that because we know that about the world. We know that animals get tired and roads can be wide, and that the width of a road would have something to do with the ability to cross it. That's general knowledge. And you need that knowledge to correctly translate the sentence into a language that has gendered pronouns. Because it is different if it's a noun that's male or female in many languages, probably most languages, certainly French and Romance languages, most of the European languages. You have to know what the word at means, what it refers to translate it. You can't just take a particular word and say that's what that word means. That word means something in the context of a sentence. And you have to understand what the sentence is about and what it is referring to in order to translate it. And so it becomes much more difficult. On the other hand, there's a lot of resources going into that, and I think machine translation is getting much better. I don't know if you've had occasion to use that. I've used it to translate some of my own stuff into Spanish or Portuguese, which I can read, and I thought it did amazingly well. I translated an article and I sent it to a journal and they published it in Portuguese after I'd written it in Spanish. It's really quite amazing if you can go into write something in Google Docs and click on translate this to Portuguese, and lo and behold, your article comes up, and it does pretty well. It doesn't mess up too many of these things. It makes changes. It makes errors. It's not perfect. It's not probably as good as a human translator, but it's getting better very fast. And we may get to the point where we will have, like in your phone, you'll talk to your phone and it'll talk to somebody in German while you're traveling in Germany, so you can translate. We've seen this in science fiction where the people are able to arrive on different planets and talk to people or something. We're doing more and more in that direction. We have to get more general to do that. You have to have some degree of understanding of what the sentence is about to translate it. You can't just translate it by going word by word or sentence by sentence all the time. Now, what they do is they go back to how people translated things in the past. And when people make a correction, they learn from the correction. So the translating programs on Google Translate, Bing Translate, when you correct something, they learn from that. I think when I go into Google Docs, if I correct my Portuguese translation, it goes in and say, well, this English really should have gone to that, and it learns from that. Okay, we look at a neural network. Neural network is something we have in our brains. We have neurons and they're networked together. We have a tremendous number, like 100 billion or something, and there are a tremendous number of connections, and a computer neural network attempts to emulate that. It's not necessarily the same, but we're trying to build computers that are using an architecture that is similar to the neurons in the brain, rather than the original architecture we had, which was what we call the von Neumann architecture, which has a set of instructions, and it has a memory, and it has a computer module, and it follows the instructions. The neural network figures things out. And what you do is you try something and it gives you an answer. If it's right, you tell it it's right. If it's wrong, you tell it it's wrong. And next time it learns to do it that way. And we have a whole section, one of the classes here, that goes into neural networks and how they work. We have a class that goes into machine learning. So these are the topics that we'll have a week on. What's intelligent, what's artificial intelligence keeps changing with time. There are two criteria that it talks about here that we tend to look for when we are going to say something has real artificial intelligence. One of which is the ability to perform tasks in complex environments without constant guidance by a user. So it acts autonomously. Now, these are all a matter of degree. They act more and more autonomously. It's not like they're going to be totally autonomous right from the start. And adaptivity, the ability to improve performance by learning from experience. That's sort of things that we're moving towards. That's what we would say that a hand calculator doesn't have these things. Is it intelligent? I don't know. If you want to add up a long column of numbers, it's better at it than a human, but it's not. It's just doing exactly what it's programmed to do. It's not autonomous. It's not learning from experience. We're moving more and more in this direction. And there are things that they learn. Now, neural networks learn some things that, and we don't know how they do it. We really don't know what's going on with the neural network. You can find out, but you can go into the computer and see, but you don't understand it. We don't know how the brain does it either. How does the brain know when it looks at a woman's face and it's, oh, that's my mother, and my 1-year-old granddaughter screams and cries if anybody but her mother picks her up. She can tell who it is. And she somehow screams and yells when my daughter, who's her aunt, picks her up, who's a very kind, affectionate, caring person, never did anything to her. I don't know how she got that, but suppose you want to look at an X-ray. I should show you the scan of my brain because I got a copy of it there when I had a tumor. You have men who went and women who went to medical school to learn how to read these X-rays, radiologists. It seems now that the computers can do it better. There's been a lot of research I go through there, and they can look at it and see what's going on. It's not that we gave them specific rules to do it. We gave them the ability to learn how to do it. And that's a higher level of intelligence. Let's go down here. I see we're running out of time. Let's try some of the exercises here. Except here, I've already answered them. So let me go over here to the other version of this where I haven't already answered them. I signed up for this course twice because once you've answered it, it has your answers there and it tells you you're a dummy. You only got 3 out of 5 right or something. And I didn't want you to see that. I wanted us to have the chance to do it ourselves. To scroll down here. Okay. These are now unanswered. Exercise 1, is this AI or not? I don't think the answers to these are really strictly necessarily what they say they are to the extent that the other exercises are. Which of the following are AI and which are not? Choose yes, no, or kind of. Or kind of means that it can both can be or can't be depending. Okay, we got the depending here. You can only submit your answer once, after which the correct answer will be revealed. So take your time. Okay, a spreadsheet that calculates sums and other predefined functions on given data. Is that an AI? Is that artificial intelligence?
Yes.
How many people say yes? I don't know. I have to look at, I don't see your faces here. I'm only seeing my screen, so I don't know what you're saying.
I need it repeated, please.
Okay, you see it on the screen. A spreadsheet that calculates sums and other predefined functions on given data. Would we say that's an AI or not?
I would say no.
Ted, we're not seeing that on the screen.
I'm not seeing it on the screen.
You're not seeing it on the screen.
No.
No.
Oh, I thought I was on screen share. Did I go off screen share or something?
We have just exercise one, is this AI or not?
Hmm. No, I'm not getting, okay. I'm gonna stop screen share. And I'm going to call this screen up on my computer. So the one that I want is on. Then I'll go back in and start screen share and see if this works. Share screen. Well, did that work? Are you seeing that?
Now, and yes.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet
Yes.
that calculates sums and other predefined functions. Where shall we vote? Yes, no, or kind of?
Yes.
Yes.
No,
Oh,
I guess I'm gonna click yes. I think I heard more yeses than no's. All right, predicting the stock market by fitting a curve to past data about stock prices. Is that? Now for AI, we want some adaptability and learning, you know. Uh-oh, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. So if you lose me, that's what's happening. How about that one? Predicting the stock market by fitting a curve to past data about stock prices.
Yes.
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 yes,
Yes.
A lot of yeses. I would say no. A GPS navigator system for finding the fastest route.
yes,
Yes.
kind of.
We got one kind of, and I heard more yeses. A music recommendation system such as Spotify that suggests music based on the user's listening behavior.
Yes.
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 yes,
Everybody says yes.
Yeah.
Big data storage solutions that can store huge amounts of data and stream them to many users at the same time.
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
No,
No.
no, I don't think so.
no,
All right, I heard more no's.
I think it is.
Photo editing features such as brightness and contrast in applications such as Photoshop.
Oh, yes.
kind of.
No.
I think I heard more no's. Style transfer filters in applications such as Prisma that take a photo and transform it into different art styles, Impressionist, Cubist.
Yes.
Yes.
Kind of.
I see
I'm hearing
no.
disagreement in our class, so not everybody's agreeing. And do you want me
We're
to
here
show
to
you the
learn.
answers, or do you want to go back and do it
Yeah.
yourself and get your own individual
No.
answers?
No,
You show
I
it.
see the answer.
All right, submit.
Ah.
Okay, now I go back here. The answer is not correct. Number one, we answered yes, and the answer is no. The outcome is determined by the user specified formula. No AI is needed. Okay, so if it gave you a formula right from the start, the spreadsheet has everything in there. It doesn't learn, it doesn't change, it doesn't try to solve a problem that you didn't anticipate. Predicting a stock market by fitting a curve to past data. We said yes, and it says that's correct. Fitting a single curve is not really AI, but there are many different curves to choose from. Even if there's a lot of data to constrain them, that one needs machines learning AI to get useful results. So apparently what they think is AI is figuring out which curve to use. Now, some people might say that's not AI. There's no, as it mentioned earlier in the lesson, there's no official answer to these things. I mean, I think, how does it figure out which one to use? My guess is it tries them all, and whichever one has worked best in the past works. Like playing a game. How many of you play Scrabble? People know how to play Scrabble?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, you get Scrabble, you get like 7 letters, and you try to fit them and make a word. I played Scrabble on a tablet computer, and I give my word, and then it says the best possible word was X. So it knows in a second what the best possible word that could have been given was. Now, how do you think it found that? How could we find the best possible?
It's a really good dictionary.
It has the same dictionary
Mathematically?
you have. It checks against the dictionary.
But it's read the whole thing. It has the whole dictionary available in a minute to it.
In a minute, that's the question, not a minute, a tenth of a second. So what the
Second,
Scrabble program does is it tries every possible play. You got 7 letters, you can play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. You can play them anywhere on the board. And it does everything. And then every time it puts one down, it checks the dictionary to see if it's a word. And if it is a word, it figures out how many points. And once it's done every single possible thing, it can tell you which is the highest points. Now, that's not really intelligence in a sense, it's just following orders. It's going through a very mechanical thing. You could do that. It would take you a week to do one play. It's a matter of timing. That's what we call brute force optimization. That's how computers are different. Computers are very, very fast. It's just doing routine operations. It's trying every single play, and it's seeing which plays are words. It checks them against a dictionary. And then if it's a legal word, it totals up the points, and then it tells you the best possible word with your letters was X. Now, that's not how humans play Scrabble. I'm not sure how we do. We look at it and we see certain letters and remind us of certain words, and we know that certain letters typically go together and certain ones don't. You know, you got to have a U after a Q or something. We don't really know exactly how the human brain does these things, but it doesn't do it that way.
Here's a Scrabble question, Ted. So let's say you're playing Scrabble and you have an option to play one word that is only going to be worth 10 points, but it is blocking a very strategic score square from your opponent. And in the long run, that's a better choice than playing a higher scoring word that doesn't provide any game strategy.
No, now that's not the tablet computers do that. I think they just get the highest score every time.
Right. I agree. But if it was using an AI system, it would be using the strategy and learning that you need to use those high scoring boxes too.
Well, that
To block.
it multiplies the amount of data we'd have to look at by a tremendous amount. Now, the brute force optimization that I talked about is not how you play chess. The computer cannot play chess that way because there are just too many options for the computer to handle when you have a series of moves. The Scrabble I'm talking about is just doing one move, and that's all that it's getting the points on that move. Even checkers cannot be solved that way. Tic-tac-toe can be solved that way because there's so few moves. So some games can, some problems can be solved with just brute force calculations. A lot of things computers can't do that way. But it's not, whether that's really AI, the computer playing Scrabble is just being mechanical. So I have a feeling that it's not. Now, of course, what the computer does is it doesn't play the best word all the time. It purposely dumbs itself down so you can beat it. And you can set the levels. You can say you're going to play beginner level, medium, high level. You know, it doesn't, it can do that because it gives you what your answer was every time, but it chooses not to do that because, you know, you wouldn't enjoy playing if it always played the perfect word. Okay, let's see. A GPS computer for finding the fastest route. Now there it's looking at a number of things and choosing answers, so they consider that to be true intelligence. And it's taking different things into account. Sometimes they're not so good. The one in my Mazda would always take me home over a gravel road you could hardly pass because it was a quarter of a mile shorter than a nice paved road or something. But they get better at that. And I think the ones, Google Maps on your phone, it takes the traffic into account. It's taking a lot of things into account, and it's making judgment. It's learning from its past experiences. So that's considered to be artificial intelligence. A music recommendation system, such as Spotify, that suggests music based on the user's listening behavior. It agrees that it's yes. The system learns from the users, not only your listening behavior. So it learns from other people, what other people have liked this one. Now you'll notice when you go on to a Pandora or a site like that, it'll have a place for you to check whether you liked a certain one or not. If you don't like it, you can push a button and go on to the next. That's all giving it information that enables it to say how different pieces of music fit together in users' preferences systems. Big data storage solutions that can store huge amounts of data and stream them to many users. That's not really making any decisions. It's not optimizing. Storing and retrieving specific items such as data collection is neither adaptive nor autonomous. So it says no. So we're saying it has to be adaptive and autonomous to qualify as an AI. Photo editing features. We said no, and apparently that's correct. The developers of the application may be creative, but the program is just following orders. Style transfer filters in applications such as Prisma. I've never used Prisma. You take a photo and transform it into different art styles. Such program methods typically learn image statistics. What small patches of the image in a certain style look like up close. and transform the import photo so that the statistics match the style. So it's adaptive. So we got 6 out of 7 answers correct. We're doing well in terms of how this is going. If you want to run through this yourself, you can again. Okay. Machine learning means that the systems improve their performance with more and more experience of data. Are you seeing the screen that I'm seeing? This is
Yes.
just for listening. Deep learning is a subfield of AI, which is a subfield of computer science. Refers to the complexity of the model and increased computing power. I'm not sure that these definitions are very helpful. Well, I think the next lessons we get into, we'll actually see how these things work. And you get a feeling. What I think with deep learning is where you have a neural network that has a number of layers in most cases. And sometimes you go through 3 or 4 layers and then you feed something from the 4th layer back to the 1st layer. And we'll be doing some of that next week. Data science. I guess that's the science of dealing with data in general. But what's really new is that we have so much more data and we can process so much. The older statistical programs were designed to deal with very limited amounts of data. The statistics that those of us who took statistics years ago or taught statistics did weren't based on just running tremendous amounts of data through, and that is what things are more like. I gave you the example of the Scrabble program where you solve Scrabble by just running through every single possible thing and then totaling them all up. It's not very beautiful in a sense. Like if you look at things like the calculus, you figure out the ideal way to do something by taking the integral of an equation. That was a really clever mathematical invention if you studied mathematics. It's not very useful for everyday life, particularly. I remember the problem I had when I was in school. If you're on a boat and your boat can go 3 miles an hour, but when you get to land, you can go 10 miles an hour, and you want to go 15 miles up the river, what point do you aim at to get there the quickest? Now, with old-fashioned mathematics like the calculus, you figure out the formula, you take the derivative, and you get the answer. What we do with a spreadsheet is we plot it out and try every single spot and see which one is quickest. So you can try 100 different ways and see which one gives you the quickest answer. It's not at all beautiful. It's not at all clever. But it's data science, and it's based on the fact that we can process a tremendous amount of data easily. So we don't have to have the smartness that you have when you've learned calculus. Robotics means building machines that operate in the world rather than just giving you a printout. And then robotics is hard for computers. The things that we think are very easy, like you picking up something and putting it down, it's very hard to train a computer to do those things. It may be harder for people than we realize, in the sense if you watch a very small child, it takes them a long time to develop those skills. So the human brain takes time. It takes a number of years before you become really, really fast. And to play the piano well, it may take more years than that. So doing things physically is difficult for computers. Some of the AI now, they're developing it more for computer games. just because they can bypass the robotics and play with artificial characters. And once they get it developed, they'll make it work with real things. So we won't be talking that much about robotics. Taxonomy of AI. Do we have time to do another? No, we don't really. It's 4:53. I'll leave this for you to do on your own if you want to do the taxonomy. Should have allowed more time for this, maybe. A Euler diagram, closely related in a more familiar Venn diagram, consists of shapes that correspond to concepts. Okay, construct a taxonomy in the Euler diagram below, showing the relationships between the AI, machine learning, computer science, data science, and deep learning. It's all going to come down to A, B, C, and D. Where would you put AI? Is it A, B, C, D, or E? I don't really like this one very much. I have the answers here, but that's cheating. I don't think this is important. I'm not going to do this. You want to do
Thank
this, you can go and do it yourself. I don't think getting these terms in order is really very valuable for us. I'm just going to skip it. We don't have to do everything in these exercises. It's there if you want to play with it, but putting those terms, it's just a matter of how they define terms. It's not particularly useful. Okay, now the next class that we have is going to get pretty technical. It's going to involve doing some computations. I would particularly be interested if some of you want to try it before class. Some of you seem very, probably better at these things than I do. I have worked through them all, so I know the answers. I can go through them, but it took me some time to figure it out and to get through it. So take a look at it. If you're interested, you can take a look at the, in the slides, I actually went through it step by step. And you're getting some of the answers. So if you look at my slides, it may give you some answers. If you're the kind of person who likes working mathematical puzzles, you'll probably enjoy it. If you're not, you may not. I will cover it in class next week. You don't have to do it, but I'm just alerting you to that. I know Louise said this was easy and fun and so on. I don't know if you got to the taxonomy when you said that or not. But I want to draw your attention to that. It's available, and you can explore it. If you just read the parts and don't come up with the answers, that's useful too. Anybody have any questions or comments or suggestions before we end today? Mary shook her head no, and that made it turn yellow. But all right, I know what no means.
Thank you for putting this together.
Yes, thanks.
It's an interest. I found the next class is very. I learned a lot from the next few classes. This one is more introductory. The next ones you're getting you're getting stuff that you don't know already, and there are right answers. It's not like some of these things, like how you define AI, as some people would disagree, but there's a lot of stuff with the computer. You do it, it works, and if you do it the other way, it just doesn't work, and that's sort of stuff like that. The kind of class where there's an infinite number of wrong answers and only one right answer, as opposed to philosophical questions where there's a whole number of answers and each of them has some merit. All right, I'll see you next week. If you have any questions during the week, feel free to email me. I'm always checking email, but if not, I'll just see you next week.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ned.
you.
Thank you.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.